Virgin Habitats, Part 1, by Adia, Elora, Rothschild. There's something sacred about a place untouched by human hands. Not sacred in a religious sense, but in the way that certain truths are self-evident once you witness them. Virgin habitats, those rare ecosystems that have evolved without significant human interference, represent more than just pristine landscapes. They are living libraries of evolutionary wisdom, carbon vaults holding back climate catastrophe, and blueprints for how life sustains itself when left to its own elegant devices. The term virgin habitat might sound romantic, even quaint, but what we're really talking about is functional integrity. These are ecosystems where the web of relationships between species remains intact, where predator and prey populations regulate themselves, where nutrient cycles flow uninterrupted, and where the architecture of life stands as evolution designed it. When I think about virgin forests in the Amazon or the Congo Basin, I'm not just imagining pretty trees. I'm thinking about hyper-complex systems, where a single handful of soil contains more organisms than there are humans on Earth, where fungi connect tree roots in vast underground networks that share resources and information, where every niche is filled and every role is played. The ecological importance of these habitats cannot be overstated. They function as genetic reservoirs, harboring biodiversity we haven't even catalogued yet. Scientists estimate we've identified less than 20% of the species on Earth, and virgin habitats are where most of the unknown reside. These aren't just curiosities for naturalists. Every species represents millions of years of problem-solving through natural selection. Medical breakthroughs, agricultural innovations, and biomimetic technologies have all emerged from studying wild organisms. When we lose a virgin habitat, we're not just losing scenery, we're burning down the research library before we've read the books. Beyond biodiversity, virgin habitats provide what ecologists call ecosystem services, though that term feels inadequate for describing how these places literally keep the planet habitable. They regulate water cycles, with intact forests acting as massive sponges that absorb rainfall, filter it through soil and roots, and release it gradually into streams and aquifers. They stabilize soil, preventing erosion that would otherwise turn fertile land into wastelands and choke rivers with sediment. They pollinate crops, decompose waste, and maintain the chemical balance of our atmosphere. And this brings us to the climate crisis. Virgin habitats, particularly old-growth forests, peatlands, and mangroves, are among the most effective carbon sinks on the planet. The Amazon alone stores something like 150 billion tons of carbon. That's carbon that would otherwise be heating our atmosphere, intensifying storms, melting ice sheets, and acidifying oceans. When virgin forests are cleared, that carbon is released. The double tragedy is that we lose both the stored carbon and the living system that was continuing to pull carbon from the air. It's like draining your savings account while also quitting your job. The connection between habitat conservation and climate stability is direct and urgent. We cannot meet global climate targets through emissions reductions alone. We need natural systems actively drawing down atmospheric carbon, and virgin habitats do this better than anything we could engineer. An old-growth forest sequesters carbon more efficiently than a plantation because of its complexity, the layered canopy, the rich understory, the deep root systems, and the thick layer of organic matter on the forest floor. These aren't just tree farms. They're carbon cathedrals built over centuries. Consider the boreal forests of Canada and Russia, often called the taiga. These vast coniferous woodlands circle the top of the world, and beneath them lies permafrost holding twice as much carbon as currently exists in the atmosphere. When virgin boreal habitat is disrupted, the permafrost thaws, releasing methane and carbon dioxide in a feedback loop that accelerates warming. Protecting these habitats isn't just about saving trees. It's about preventing a climate tipping point that could make our current crisis look mild. Or take tropical peatlands like those in Indonesia and the Congo. Peat is partially decomposed organic matter that accumulates in waterlogged conditions, and it's one of the most carbon-dense ecosystems on Earth. Some tropical peatlands have been accumulating carbon for thousands of years, creating layers tens of feet deep. Continues in Part 2. Virgin Habitats, Part 2, by Adia, Elora, Rothschild. Consider the boreal forests of Canada and Russia, often called the taiga. These vast coniferous woodlands circle the top of the world, and beneath them lies permafrost, holding twice as much carbon as currently exists in the atmosphere. When virgin boreal habitat is disrupted, the permafrost thaws, releasing methane and carbon dioxide in a feedback loop that accelerates warming. Protecting these habitats isn't just about saving trees. It's about preventing a climate tipping point that could make our current crisis look mild. Or take tropical peatlands like those in Indonesia and the Congo. Peat is partially decomposed organic matter that accumulates in waterlogged conditions, and it's one of the most carbon-dense ecosystems on Earth. Some tropical peatlands have been accumulating carbon for thousands of years, creating layers tens of feet deep. When these areas are drained for agriculture, the peat dries out, decomposes, and releases its carbon. The fires that periodically sweep through degraded peatlands in Indonesia have produced emissions comparable to entire industrialized nations. The tragedy is that virgin habitats are disappearing at a terrifying rate. We've already lost more than half of the world's original forests. Wetlands have been drained, grasslands plowed under, coral reefs bleached and dynamited. The remaining virgin habitats are fragments, islands in a sea of human modification. And as these fragments shrink, they lose their resilience. Edge effects penetrate deeper, invasive species infiltrate, microclimates shift, animal populations become isolated and genetically vulnerable. Some virgin habitats have captured public imagination and benefited from conservation attention. The Galapagos Islands, with their fearless wildlife and evolutionary significance, receive protection and research funding. The Serengeti's spectacular migrations draw tourists whose dollars support conservation. Antarctica, governed by international treaty, remains largely untouched, a frozen laboratory for studying climate change. But many equally critical virgin habitats remain obscure and vulnerable. The Tarkine rainforest in Tasmania, the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, the Lusa ecosystem in Sumatra. These places rarely make headlines, yet they harbor irreplaceable biodiversity and provide crucial climate regulation. The cloud forests of the Andes, perpetually wrapped in mist, contain species found nowhere else and capture water that millions of people downstream depend on. The deep ocean trenches, technically virgin habitat in their inaccessibility, are now threatened by deep-sea mining before we've even understood what lives there. One of the uncomfortable truths about virgin habitat conservation is the question of access. Who gets to experience these places? Historically, conservation has sometimes meant excluding indigenous peoples who lived sustainably in these ecosystems for generations, while wealthy tourists fly in for guided experiences. This is both unjust and counterproductive. Indigenous communities often serve as the most effective habitat guardians, and their traditional ecological knowledge is invaluable for conservation efforts. But there's a tension here. Virgin habitats are, by definition, places where human impact has been minimal. Increasing access, building roads, trails, facilities, inevitably degrades what makes these places special. Tourism, even ecotourism, brings waste, noise, and disturbance. The Instagram age has shown how social media can turn once pristine locations into overcrowded attractions almost overnight. Perhaps the answer isn't about making virgin habitats more accessible in a physical sense, but more present in our consciousness and our priorities. Through technology, through education, through art and storytelling, we can help people understand the value of places they may never visit. We can recognize that some places are worth preserving, not for what we can extract from them, or how they can serve us, but because they have intrinsic value, because they work, because in their untouched complexity, they show us what functional looks like. The conservation of virgin habitats requires a shift in how we think about land use and economic value. Currently, the economic incentives are perverse. A forest is worth more cut down than standing, peatland more valuable drained than wet, grassland more profitable as farmland than wildlife habitat. Continues in Part 3. Virgin Habitats, Part 3, by Adia Elora Rothschild. The conservation of virgin habitats requires a shift in how we think about land use and economic value. Currently, the economic incentives are perverse. A forest is worth more cut down than standing, peatland more valuable drained than wet, grassland more profitable as farmland than wildlife habitat. Until we account for the true value of ecosystem services and carbon storage, until we make conservation more economically viable than destruction, virgin habitats will continue disappearing. This means paying for protection through carbon credits, through international conservation funds, through recognizing indigenous land rights, through changing agricultural subsidies that encourage habitat destruction. It means accepting that some places should be off-limits to extraction and development. Not because we're anti-progress, but because maintaining functioning ecosystems is the most progressive thing we can do. The science is clear. Virgin habitats are not expendable luxuries for nature enthusiasts. They are critical infrastructure for a stable climate and a functioning biosphere. Every hectare of old-growth forest, every acre of intact wetland, every stretch of undisturbed coastline that we protect is an investment in our collective survival. These places are doing work we cannot replicate, storing carbon, generating biodiversity, regulating climate, purifying water. As we face the compounding crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, the preservation of virgin habitats moves from the realm of environmental nicety to existential necessity. These ecosystems represent our best allies in the fight against global warming, our richest source of biological innovation, and our most honest teachers about how life sustains itself over the long term. We stand at a hinge point in history. The virgin habitats that remain are not infinite. Once converted, they cannot be restored to their original complexity, not in any time frame meaningful to human civilization. The decisions we make now about which lands to protect, which forests to save, which ecosystems to prioritize will echo for generations. Our descendants will either thank us for our wisdom or curse us for our short-sightedness. The choice, as always, is ours. But the clock is running, and the forests, peatlands, and grasslands that remain cannot wait for us to get around to caring about them. They are disappearing now, while we debate and delay. Every day that passes with virgin habitat unprotected is a day we cannot get back. A loss we cannot undo, a future we close off forever. Perhaps that's what makes virgin habitats truly sacred. Not that they exist for us, but that they exist at all, still wild, still whole, still showing us what the earth can be when we let it breathe. The End, by Adia Elora Rothschild.